presentations.
Yeah, great. I gotta go on this. So it's a good hard whack.
Hello, welcome to the UX and Data Meetup. Let's all give a round of applause for John, who's going to tell us about designing with tools, bringing data to life with interactive experiences. Let's get a round of applause.
Thanks, Matt. There we go. Thank you so much, Matt, for inviting me. My name's John Ryan. I'm the Director of Interaction Design at a firm called Local Projects. I'm super excited about this intersection of UX and data, bringing together technology and human experience. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you and just to share some of our work this evening. So Local Projects is filled with people, I think, of similar passions to you guys. We're an experience design firm. We focus on crafting meaningful experiences with technology. So the firm was founded by Jake Barton over a decade ago, and we've grown from that one-man studio to we're kind of a 60 or 70 person team right now. And our work comes in all shapes and sizes. An early project was this digital recording booth. That was one of the firm's first projects for an NPR Library of Congress project, StoryCorps, recording everyday lives of Americans, to partnering with architects, in this case, Frank Gehry, for work on the Eisenhower Memorial off Washington, D.C. Mall. And we also work with brands to express their identity or to explore new markets. Here, this is a project we did for Target in San Francisco, exploring smart devices in the future of the connected home. One of our largest projects to date was doing all the media on the 9/11 Memorial Museum, partnering with Think Design, producing all, I think it was maybe 90 media pieces for inside the museum. So as a studio, we're not really interested in creating passive experiences, but in designing interactions that empower people, that invite people to participate. So we're not a firm that works purely with data or with data visualization, nor do we work with kind of linear media that just purely tells a single story. We're somewhere in the middle, I think, where we leverage data and technology to inspire and to enable a multitude of stories to be told, to put power in the hands of the audience. So we work with a broad variety of cutting-edge technologies, and many of our projects are data-driven in numerous ways, but in many ways as a team of designers, developers, researchers, architects. I think we engage in one of the oldest of human activities, that of toolmaking. So that's the lens I wanted to use to talk about our work to you this evening, in imagining new ways to leverage technology and to experience data. Use this lens to talk about some of our key design principles that inform what we do and share a couple of projects. So I wanted to get started with perhaps the most successful design in human history. It's a good place as any to start, at least when measured by product lifecycle. So this model was market leader for approximately 1.5 million years, which is pretty good. The Acheulean hand axe, it's believed to be the first designed object. And the skills that were used to make it were passed endlessly from generation to generation. If you like Roman Mars and his podcast, 99% Invisible, he has a great episode on the hand axe. One of the most ancient and one of the most human things, I think, are the objects that we make and the objects that we use to survive. So in that way, I think it puts design as one of the oldest of human disciplines. But why did this hand axe, why did it last? What made it so successful? It was functional, yes. It was actually optimized for use, for multi-purpose use, they think. So in a way, it was like the first Swiss Army knife. But as designers, I think if we aim for the purely functional, I think we set the bar low. And experts believe that it actually went beyond this for the axe. It became a a social symbol, a form of self-expression. Maybe it was a means for attracting mates, they think. And apparently that's the sexy hand axe theory. Pretty interesting. People got attached to them, they crafted them. In a way, they capture this innate human desire to express and embed ourselves in our surroundings, to make meaning from the world and objects around us. But as humans, we didn't stop once we discovered making a fire to keep warm. Afterwards, we'd pick up the pieces of charcoal and we'd start creating. So almost immediately after we discover tools for function that help us survive, we start using them for self-expression. We make our mark on the world, we make meaning with them, we embed narrative. Because we're storytellers. And I think this is something critical to remember when we design experiences or when we work with data in a way that we want to make it accessible and visible and engaging for people. Human creativity, whether that be storytelling, design, engineering, working with data, visualizing it, human creativity drives us forward as a species. And that idea is something that we try to harness in our work. It's the reason that we build tools over purely passive media or purely functional interactions, because tools invite users to create their own experiences, to make their own meaning, to put a bit of themselves in the interaction. So this invitation to express yourself plays out in a lot of our projects. I wanted to speak to it specifically for this project for the Cleveland Museum of Art. So it's one of the top 5 art museums in America, and they were undergoing a gallery expansion. And they realized, they weren't in New York. They didn't have quite the scale of audience there. So they wanted to look to technology to think how they might reinvent their galleries and draw in new audiences. So there was an existing scheme in place that had multiple iPads by every artwork, but we actually recommended that they got rid of 80% of the screens. We like to use technology in ways that diminishes its presence in the gallery, in a way that augments what's already there. So we wanted to leave space for visitors' own experiences. So we put a series of large screens, we call them lenses, away from the artworks in the middle of galleries. These were simple tools that were designed to amplify the experience of being in the gallery, not try to take you somewhere else. So you can choose to use it or you can choose to ignore the screen. Here, this lens kind of thinks about looking at context, filling in the white space around artworks and artifacts. One of the most successful, I think, builds on this desire I mentioned for self-expression. So it uses facial recognition to browse the museum's collection. It allows visitors to kind of embody others, gets to this idea of what's at the heart of portraiture, this ability to empathize and to connect, not to observe remotely or abstractly. And it was hugely appealing across all ages of the audience who connected with it. This further interactive, it came from a discussion with curators that when people look at figurative sculpture, they just look at the expression. They don't always see the pose is key to what the artist is doing. So we started to think, how might a tool enable visitors to connect with this form in a new way? So here you simply, it's a simple game. You choose a sculpture and you try and match it, and you get a percentage of how closely you match the sculpture. And again, this became this kind of competitive thing between family members or visitors who were at the museum together in groups. The center of the experience is this collections wall where you can see all 3,000 artworks. So museums often have these huge data sets, and they don't know how to make them available to visitors in meaningful ways. So we designed this tool for connecting the whole size of the collection, but also for seeing more curatorial moments that maybe aren't in the galleries. So moving through subsets and groupings. And it allows for both curator-created collections and also kind of personal curation. So you can tap the artworks that you're interested in seeing, and it saves them to your iPad, and that then generates a custom tour that you can take around the museum. So we wanted to reimagine the museum as a platform, one that allows you to make your own experience, one that makes this kind of hidden data set accessible for visitors in a way that drives them to connect with the rest of the museum. Elegance, candor, and purity. The American photographer Walter Evans, he used these words to sum up the timeless appeal of common everyday tools back in the 1950s. I think as designers, we can appreciate this beauty maybe more than many. I know so many of us are obsessed with our tools. What's the latest prototyping tool? How can I try this out and get it into my tool set? And I think this elegance it's explicit in their form, but it's also implicit in their design. Brett Victor, who's this great interaction design kind of thinker and writer, I think he captures this very well when he describes a tool as that which addresses human needs by amplifying human capabilities. So we think back again to prehistoric man. He had a need to eat. He had the capability to aim and to exert force, but he needed to amplify those abilities, those capabilities, with a sharpened rock or with a spear. Tools leverage our ability to do more than we could do without them. And this primitive task, I think, is at the core of a lot of our design processes, taking what people can do and enabling them to do what they want to do. And I think a great tool is designed to fit both the capability and the need, both the person and the problem. So often we find, I don't know if you find the same, but we find that clients approach us and they want to use technology for technology's sake. Use the next shiny big thing. But we want to find ways to make technology disappear and to bring the experience to the fore. I think the best tools are those that are so natural it feels just like you're using your own capability. You're hammering a nail, you kind of forget the hammer's there, you're just aiming on the nail, it becomes an extension of you. The tool becomes invisible. And I think this is the constant challenge for designers. It's finding and designing the right tool that optimizes for both of these parts in a way that causes it to feel natural, causes the tool and the technology to nearly disappear into the background. So the best tools are those perfectly simple solutions that amplify natural capabilities in a way that causes the tool itself to sink into the background and the experience to come to the fore. So we were asked by the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum to come up with a visitor technology that emphasized play and spoke specifically to a design museum. We thought, well, we could do an app, but maybe it doesn't fit the need exactly. What's special? What's unique about this space and these visitors that we could take advantage of? How could what we give visitors set an expectation that they're there to design, that they're there to make, not just to consume, but to become part of what it is that they're seeing? What tool could we give them? Something that would build on their capabilities. So we worked with the architects, Diller, Scafidio, Renfro, and the museum, and developed this idea, simple idea in many ways, of a pen. It's a way to invite visitors to learn more about design by designing themselves. This is a great image. It's in the museum itself, which kind of shows all the stages of prototyping right through to the finished product, which I love as someone who loves prototyping. So the entire experience is built around a tool. This pen, which is a bookmarking system. So it's a stylus that has on one end, and it has an integrated NFC, antenna, and circuit board, and storage. So it takes people's desire and ability to make, to create, and it amplifies that. It puts you in the design process. So arriving at the museum in the Upper East Side, right by the Guggenheim, every visitor gets a pen with their ticket. And then they can use that pen to collect inspiration with that RFID reader built into the pen, which then when they touch the table, their kind of collection of inspiration comes out. They can explore on the tables, this collecting inspiration from this kind of central river of collection items that are floating by. You can also draw a line anywhere on the table to find an item in the collection that has that same shape, that same line. And obviously, it's also a tool for making. So you're there, you've gathered, you've collected inspiration, and then we wanted to create moments, simple moments for visitors of all ages to make. So the tables also include these simple making tools. You have this inspiration gathered around you, and then you can simply design your own. So design a building, a piece of furniture, a lamp, and then you can use the pen to save your creation and check it out when you get home. I think they want to add 3D printing, which I think would be a great feature here. So you've designed your chair, and then you get to take a little mini prototype of it home. So one of my favorite experiences at the museum came from this crazy idea. What if visitors got so caught up in the act of making and of designing that they started scribbling on the walls themselves? I think so many designers, in our little whiteboard rooms, and all we want to do is get the markers out and start ideating. We wanted to infect visitors with that same fervor. So this is an immersive wallpaper room. So it allows you to design your own wallpaper, and you're surrounded by the creation as it evolves. As well as browse, the museum has a huge collection of actual wallpapers that are digitized. And so we wanted to get them across in a form that's close to how they're originally intended. So seeing them on the wall around you. And it's been one of the most popular rooms in the museum. I think proven both by its ability to appeal to all ages, as well as the number of selfies that are taken there. So the museum now features the best selfies every week on Wallpaper Wednesday. So you can check that out if you follow them on Instagram. A lot of our clients, we work with museums and educational institutions. A lot of them have storytelling and an education as a really core part of what they want to do. And this cartoon from the 70s, it was floating around the office. It kind of illustrates this sort of traditional idea of a factory model of education. So, rote memorization. The teacher stands up there, they broadcast knowledge, and then the children just sit there recording it. And this is obviously a very traditional idea, but in some cases one that we find is still deeply ingrained in schools and particular institutions. There's a great little detail that shows how well this dates. There's a comment up here: the brain can store more information than the most complex computer. So I don't know if we'd be writing that anymore. So as seen in the Cooper Hewitt, I think activity-based learning, engaged curiosity is one of the best ways to get people to understand, to learn, and to remember something. This isn't a new idea, and it's a really core principle for us. This is probably Jake, our founder's favorite quote. I hear it from him all the time. So much so, I nearly attribute it to him instead of to Confucius. Sometimes I get the two of them confused. But I hear and I remember, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And I think one of the reasons we create tools and experiences that draw people in to get involved with themselves is because as humans, this is how we really start to understand and how we start to grasp things. Tools enable doing, and therefore they facilitate understanding and discovery. They allow you to manipulate, maybe to get in there and to explore the data, to see it in a new way, to get your hands around it, to start to get to feel for what it is that's in front of you. And all of a sudden you start to kind of understand it in a deeper way. So we designed a series of apps for the New York Hall of Science. So they approached us with this idea of creating digital noticing tools, they call them, for learning STEM subject areas. So they didn't want just an overly didactic experience, and they didn't want games. They wanted tools that would empower children to explore the math and science in the world around them. They run programs at the museums that do this in a very physical way. This is a space in the museum called the Design Lab that encourages kids to get making and playing. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's an awesome space they've just finished installing. And they came to us to create virtual tools that that kind of support this same kind of learning and activity, but in middle school classrooms. I think part of what they're teaching kids in this hands-on making process is to use it as a means of investigation and problem solving themselves. And actually, I think it exposes kids a lot to what we do in the design process ourselves. Testing our assumptions, prototyping, iteration. And I know, I'm sure all of us would probably agree on this, that no matter how incredible your design and planning process is, you don't know for sure how well it works until you get it in front of visitors. What comes across wonderfully, I don't know if you've had this experience, but in a client presentation, pitch in the boardroom, it doesn't always work on the floor with visitors or once you get it into users' hands. And so this idea of prototyping early and often is a core principle for us, and I think it's one of the tools that we have in our tool belt as designers. Getting technology working and into users' hands as early as possible. So I'm just going to show you a little example of that in this process, kind of how it played out. So one of the apps, we did a series of 5, and one of the apps started with a simple idea. Kids are sitting there in the classroom. There's maybe a portion of them who are bored in their physics class, and they're staring out the window, just counting down the minutes until they can get out into the playground. And what they don't realize is actually, when they go out into the playground, they're going to be enacting a lot of those physics principles that they are ignoring being written out on the whiteboard in front of them. So could we create an app that would allow children to discover and explore these principles for themselves, actually in the playground, to take the data that they were playing out and visualize it for them in a way that would allow them to kind of comprehend these physics principles in a very sort of living, fun way. So everyone loved this idea, and so we quickly imagined straight out of the gates how hardware sensors might be used to capture and visualize these forces. So we had an iPad which facilitated the learning, and it was reading data from these custom sensor boxes attached to the mats. And each mat was made of a different material, so students would slide down the slide and they'd record their velocity and see how the frictional forces were different between materials. But what we quickly discovered was that hardware it's pretty hard. And it wasn't reliable, and it was going to be something that was going to be, for us, very difficult to scale, without really building our own product and just having a different set of resources. So Eric, who's one of our developers, one of our tech geniuses, he realized that there was a company out there who built awesome hardware filled with sensors, and everyone had one in their pocket, Apple. So he built this proof of concept that recorded movement while you were holding an iPhone or while it was in your pocket, and just quickly he mocked up this visualization of the data that he was getting out of that. And looking at this, there was something there. There was this kind of potential learning moment. I think our inner 12-year-olds were immediately intrigued. What is it that's happening there? Why does the line go that way? I was the kid who always kind of got the tape recorder from my parents, and then a week later they found it like split down into parts on the floor of my room. So this was kind of appealing to that part of my inner 12-year-old. We weren't quite sure exactly what was there, but we felt this excitement about this ability to see the invisible. So we started building complexity. So Eric, he built this prototype that allowed the phone to talk directly to the iPad. So it would give the sensor data, it would feed it to the iPad while you were recording a video, so you could kind of see what was happening in the video at the same time in sync with this data that was coming through from the accelerometer and the gyroscope, etc. So you kind of got the sense of being able to kind of see the physics that was happening under the hood of the video. Then we got super excited and we thought, what about if we used computer vision to track and record the phone's movement? Here it's embedded inside a ball. Awesome idea, but as you can see, it was a total failure. And I'm sure many of you know how, this is my favorite one. Paul looks quite dismayed. I'm sure all of you know how important failure is in the design process. But to be honest, I think it's something that I have to continually remind myself of and remind the teams that I work on. Another Irishman You may have picked up the accent. He's far smarter than me and maybe a little bit better known. But he wrote that geniuses don't make mistakes, that they intentionally fail, understanding that errors are portals to discovery. I heard someone recently describe it like this: if you don't allow for failure, then you won't have success. So with our failure behind us, it caused us to rethink about how we might track movement. So instead of automated video tracking, we realized that obviously, these kids themselves were going to do a lot better job of tracking than this computer vision system we developed. So we created a means for them to trace the movement on screen, and then that could be merged with the live data coming from the phone. So at this point, we got out there with our prototype, we tested it again, and I think one of the major outcomes was that we realized the data wasn't super easy to understand, especially for middle school science students. And so we came back and had a further pass where we, along with our graphic designers, we simplified and kind of optimized how the data was represented to really make it accessible for these students. Translating it, making it readable in an appropriate way. And I think that's obviously a key process for a lot of us when we take a data set and start to think about who are the audience that we want to make this accessible to. This balance between what story should the data tell and how that plays out in relation to its priority against kind of making every data point explicitly readable. And in this case, we really wanted to kind of tell the overarching story, identify those kind of moments when those physics principles were at play, but in a simple way that students could kind of read in a way that they were used to seeing in their textbook. So the New York Hall of Science, they spent a year testing the app in classrooms, and so far the feedback has been really, really great. Students seem super engaged, they enjoy using the tool and learning as they're using it. We had a fun moment when we made a super brief appearance, half a second, in the recent Apple keynote. But even half a second, we were thankful to Tim for. But more importantly is the impact, I think, on the students. There's just a couple of little snippets from some interviews we've had with students who've used the app.
I understand it better when it's in the app. From the book, they don't really show it. I mean, like, they just tell you it, but they don't really show it. From the app, you can do it by yourself.
I can see everything really clearly, the kinetic energy and speed.
Having so much fun is the best time.
I think it's very fun and educational because you could find out more about potential and kinetic energy.
It's like so exciting and eager to do another experiment with it.
So this was obviously, super inspiring for us. Students were walking away from the experience. They'd had fun, they were excited, but they'd also learned something. And they were beginning to kind of see the world in a different way. They were starting to be changed by the tool. And this idea of being changed by our tools is, super common. You're probably familiar with this quote that was popularized by Marshall McLuhan, that tools have the power to shape us. They have the power to shape our understanding, to shape us, and I think to shape the world around us. I love this project just as kind of an example of a tool. It's by Sarah Hendrens. She's an artist and a design researcher based in Cambridge. And I heard her speak about designing this tool. She worked with two communities who don't often work together, skateboarders and wheelchair users. And they designed these really simple ramps that allowed users to kind of hack the city, to make the city work better for themselves. So they could make an older building wheelchair accessible, or they could create a kind of pop-up impromptu skate park. A really simple tool that gave people ownership over how they experienced their surroundings, enabling them to reshape the city. And tools also, they shape our understanding. I've been working on a project, I think I mentioned earlier that we have recently launched in public beta a new app for the American Museum of Natural History. And as we were there, we get to meet with these incredible scientists and they show us what they're working on. And this is just a screen grab from Digital Universe, which is a tool they use to visualize space data. Really amazing tool. And this is an image of the known universe. And whenever I saw it, I was asking them, what are these? Why is the universe shaped in this way? Why do we have these big kind of blank areas and this kind of radial shape kind of out from the center. And it's just because these are the areas that we have data from. These are the only directions we've looked at yet. We're obviously right in the middle, and this is just kind of where our telescopes and our tools have looked. So even our perception of the universe is influenced by the tools that we use to look at it through. And I'm also interested in how tools shape us. So obviously in this, in this age of wearable devices and quantified self, there's massive access to tools and data that might potentially change not only how we understand the world out there, but also how we understand ourselves. There's this potential for this exciting feedback loop that allows us to literally sort of shape ourselves and shape our habits, maybe get in shape. And we don't yet know, I think, at this stage, how that kind of feedback loop is going to play out as this new sort of technology and space evolves. And this was actually the basis for a project we did for the Tech Museum of Innovation in San Jose. And they approached us to work on a project around the quantified self and biometrics that we can get from sort of devices and sensors that are starting to surround us every day. It's a super fascinating project. Visitors would come in. It's a science museum, focused on kids and family, and they check out a series of sensors. So they have a brain activity monitor, they'd have something that would measure their skin's galvanic response and heart rate, and then the sensors that were built into an iPod Touch, which would hang around their neck. And then they go off around the museum, exploring. There's loads of fun physical activities, there's more kind of socially engaged activities, more kind of like focused ones. And all the while, the phone, the iPod Touch was giving them feedback about themselves, about what the sensors were kind of thinking in terms of the types of experience they were having, how much they were engaging with others, where was their most active moments. And at the end, they could come back and place the devices down on this touch table, and all of their data from their visit would come streaming out. So they could explore and see how they reacted at particular moments, and also place the device down alongside a friend and compare themselves to start to see, at particular moments, who was maybe more focused, who was more engaged. And I think, as designers working in this space, there's often new technologies, but I think this is one specifically where we're some of the first people to explore these new applications, new ideas, new potentials, and it's a really exciting place to work in, and I think a very necessary one. We have the opportunity to really make data human, to make it powerful in terms of the stories and personal connections and implications it has. As we start to augment ourselves more, what we learn from our personal data, has the potential to change how we understand ourselves, how we act, and how we live. And ultimately, tools are intended to bring about change. We'll continue to make them and use them out of this human desire to go beyond our current abilities, beyond our current limitations, to extend our reach. So the best tools, just to recap, the ones that we at local projects really strive to create, they're tools that invite self-expression, so that encourage users to become storytellers themselves, to make and find their own meaning, to let the technology get out of the way so that they can kind of find their own voice. Tools that amplify capability, so they take the spark of a need, an idea or a desire, and they amplify it. They fan it into flame, bringing a dream to life. Tools that facilitate learning, so they enable doing, and therefore they facilitate understanding and discovery. And ultimately, tools that shape us. We shape our tools, and thereafter they begin to shape us. I love this juxtaposition from It was actually in an exhibit at the Cooper Hewitt. They had on tools. An iPhone and that hand axe I showed you, both sitting side by side in the case. And I think these are both tools that succeed on all of those points. And I think beyond this, the best tools really allow us to embed ourselves in them. We create stories and solutions with tools, but also to a degree, we put ourselves into them. They become symbols of us. So the Acheulean hand axe literally and metaphorically kind of carried a person's imprint, their hand, the form that they chose to express themselves. And I was thinking about kind of a similar thing in terms of our phones recently. We had, in the family, someone passed away, and her husband, kind of in the run-up to the funeral and everything, I was very struck by how meaningful and significant her phone was and the data that it contained for him. He was able to get photos there of their favorite moments and get songs, her favorite songs that he could kind of play during the ceremony. And he had all of these videos and these moments, these kind of jokes that they'd shared together. And it just struck me how the degree to which we can kind of, in the best tools, we can actually express ourselves and start to kind of nearly become embedded within those tools. I love this quote from Steve Jobs, and I think, it applies to technology, but I think, more broadly it applies as we think about various applications for data. Technology is nothing. What's important is that you have a faith in people and that they're basically good and smart, and if you give them tools, they'll do wonderful things with them. So let's strive to create tools that empower people, that they might be able to embed themselves in and express themselves through. Not just tools for solving problems, but tools that equip us to move beyond our current limitations, to find new perspectives, to grow and to be changed. Tools that enable their users to do wonderful things with them. It's amazing what you can do with the right tools. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take a few questions now. Please wait until we give you the mic. Obviously, every project is unique and different, and your creative process must be very organic and spontaneous. But can you describe your creative process, how you approach a project, and align all of these different components and move in a certain direction?
Totally, yeah. Organic is a great way of describing it. I'm gonna have to use that now. Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of core things. I think initially there's this combination of, our strategists kind of go sort of into an in-depth research mode with the clients and really to identify the audience. And at the same time, our creative team kind of tries to find a couple of ways in. Like, what are those big ideas, but ones that are very approachable and very easy to grasp? And I think those ideas, they don't often come easy. I know that, for the Cooper Hewitt, that pen, there was endless iterations before they got there. But I think as soon as they found that sort of metaphor or that very simple idea, it was kind of a breakthrough point in the project. And then very quickly, we just try to make things tangible. Take some of those ideas, build out prototypes, get them into people's hands, get them onto museum floors if that's the context, and start to get feedback from people about the experience itself, and take it from there. See where that leads us. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm curious to hear what you think. So you mentioned how tools shape us and shape our understanding, and you mentioned the smartphone. And in some ways, I think about the ways that smartphones have shaped us negatively. Like, they've made it harder to connect with each other. They make us distracted sometimes, and we get hit by cars. How do you think as a designer about the ethics of the way that tool sets shape us? And how do you, because as a designer, you really want to try things and experiment and get out and do things, but how do you think about sort of checking that impulse a little bit to think about what the unexpected implications might be of the way the tool might shape you?
That's a huge question. I think, that in mind is one reason I think why that project from Sarah Hendren so appealed to me. I think part of what's so successful about it is that she really embedded herself in the communities that she was designing for, and I think she kind of moved beyond the sort of direct, obvious sort of business goals of a project, and really identified with the kind of needs on the ground for not the majority of users, but those kind of like edge cases, or those smaller parties that maybe might be left out when you kind of design from the middle. So I think that's a part of it. I think a part of it is getting out of the studio. It's so easy to sit there and you design inside a screen, and that obviously limits your constraints. But I think even in terms of some of those implications, the sort of ethical implications of what you're designing, I think staying there behind your screen is a very sheltered place to do it. And I think until you get out into the world with people, you don't necessarily see those types of perspectives. But I don't know. I think it's something as an industry that we define better forums for kind of reflecting on together, and finding means for bringing those kind of questions to the fore. Great question.
Hi, I really liked the Cleveland museum that you guys did. And my question was, what technology did you guys use for the huge screen that had like 2,000 images? And could that be used on an app? Could you guys explore that?
Great question. So now that you ask me, I'm forgetting the name of the screens themselves. But it'll come to me and I'll tell you afterwards. But the screens are basically they're small boxes that are actually back projected, each individual screen, and that means you don't get kind of a bevel at the edge, so they can go kind of face to face. So that's how you can get like such a big, large area. And then they have basically infrared touch overlays, which kind of see where people are touching. In terms of the software itself, when we're not building for mobile systems, a lot of the time we use a coding framework called the Open Framework. So it's just a C++ framework that our developers are super into, and so they kind of use that to develop all of that software from scratch, and then it integrates with kind of regular backend systems that a website would run off to kind of access the data in a museum's backend. So I think in terms of the data and the sort of overall user experience, I think some of that can be translated to mobile devices, and in that case there was a mobile component to it. But I think often, when we're designing for some of these bigger or more immersive experiences, you just have such a different set of constraints and such a different frame of mind for the user, that a lot of those experiences just don't really translate. They're kind of unique to the medium that they end in. I don't think some of them necessarily work as well. Looking at 3,000 images flowing by you at once doesn't necessarily work well on a tiny screen. I think, yeah. Depends how loud you are. Here we go. Christie microtiles, that's the name of the screen technology that we use for the walls.
Sort of a continuation of a point that was raised earlier about the possibility of the ethics of what
yeah.
used. What about moving going further, thinking about, have you ever been approached by clients who are not necessarily fluid people? Let's say you have military, police, you have all kinds of other interests out there. Has that ever been approached? Has that ever been thought of as to what this technology and this approach could do in those areas?
Yeah, good question. Yes, I mean, Jake, in founding the company, has been pretty specific about the kinds of projects that we've worked on. He's always had kind of a bent that we make projects that are interesting and meaningful, so that there's kind of that's a weight, I think, as we assess, what the client's trying to do. I think, it's super exciting to work on educational projects and on projects in public spaces like galleries and museums. But yeah, we've had a couple of people, I think, knock on our door who we've said, we're not quite the right match here. Which I think, again, going back to those kind of ethical decisions, like that's a great way to, if you have the opportunity to choose your client, then I think you can choose well in terms of who you want to work with and what the bigger outcome of what you're working on is.
Follow up.
Yeah.
There is an open, the Pandora's box has been basically opened here.
The Pandora's box has been opened? Yeah.
This capability.
Yeah. Thanks. Great.
So we represent a nonprofit that is not a traditional software development shop. In a lot of ways, we are a sort of little startup inside of a larger organization, and we're a young design and development team. So I'm curious, what are some of the tools that you guys use in designing and in making that you really like? And what are some strategies that your team uses when you get really stuck on something?
Great question. First up, I'm super excited to hear the context that you guys are working in. I think, more and more I hear of these super interesting teams that are really embedded in these organizations that are seeking a kind of like a bigger or better good. And I actually spent a bit of time a couple of years ago working for UNICEF, have a technology for development team, and they do some really interesting, innovative work in projects around education and health. And so yeah, I'd say there's a pretty interesting forum of people who are kind of working in your space that I'd love to meet more of. Tools-wise, good question. I don't know, I think particularly our interaction design team, we're always kind of looking for the next thing. So, we've people who are playing with Framer or playing with InVision for prototyping. Often we come back to using Keynote. A lot of the time, Keynote's somehow become like this post-it note or Swiss Army knife that just gets used for all sorts of things it was never intended to be used for. And then I think beyond the interaction design team, obviously, there's kind of a lot of the regular Creative Cloud stuff from Adobe, and we've got a bunch of all of our interaction designers have kind of pushed our visual designers towards Sketch, so there's like a slow adoption of that across the studio, which has been super interesting. But I think even as our kind of team has grown in the last year, we've brought on an architecture and physical design team. So one of those tomorrow is going to do a class on Rhino for developing kind of 3D models. And so that's a fun thing for us about being in a very multidisciplinary office, is that you'll have coders who then kind of teach our designers to code, or architects who are trying to let interaction designers know about how kind of spatial interactions happen. And so yeah, I don't know, there's kind of a constant evolution of tools. I think in terms of some of the strategies and principles, I think even some of those big ideas, I think identifying your kind of core design values or philosophies. For us, it's really about enabling visitors, having them able to tell their own story, making it participatory so that kind of they can do themselves and kind of create a more memorable experience that way. I think they're kind of big overarching ideas that we will continually come back to when we get stuck on a project, to kind of like realign us.
I'm kind of on the opposite of that, where my company is embedded, but we are a bit more traditional in our ways in terms of process. And so to that point, most of these projects are more untraditional.
Yeah.
And I have to work on some of these too. And when you work with different disciplinaries and on these kinds of projects, could you talk a little bit about like how the different teams work together and tackle problems in a non-conventional way?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, great question. I think I'm going to start calling our process organic from now on. I love that. Again, yeah, it is organic. It changes from project to project. I think, as a studio, we'll continually come back to sort of a traditional user experience-led process that leads us through from research, through ideation and prototyping. But as every project comes along in a new sort of space, some of that gets carried through and some of it gets dropped. And there's moments when kind of projects fall back to a more sort of waterfall style approach, and I feel like because the medium changes so much, that's sort of a fallback, particularly for our project managers, because they know, oh, you do it and you hand it to you. And so there's always this constant battle, like, okay, we're in something new, we're falling back towards that, but we want to find ways to get everyone involved early. We've been experimenting with different things. We did a project, or we're working on a project at the moment, which is new for us, designing part of a workspace actually for a fast food chain. And looking at how technology could kind of optimize that. I think that's pretty interesting, because in that case we were just like, well, let's just start building this stuff. Let's get the developers to make something. We'll get one UX person on it, working alongside them, but literally kind of looking over their shoulder. And let's just get stuff that we can start prototyping with. So let's get something in foam core. Let's get some materials in that we can start to project on. And so I don't know. We're constantly kind of trying to reinvent that, picking out tools that we all know and have proven useful in other situations, but yet kind of constantly trying new things. But I'd love to, hear like what that looks like for you. And Hi.
I wanted to know what tools or ways, methods you use for measuring the success or impact of the tools you design for museums.
Another great question. Interesting. I often have this conversation with designers who are like working very much like in the product space rather than the agency space, because I'm always kind of jealous that they have this like long-term engagement with their users, and they have this data that's building over time, and they can kind of be constantly responding to it. And I think in an agency setting, it's often challenging when the project is kind of a limited engagement, and so you kind of get a couple of iterations during the prototyping process, but once the finished thing goes out there, unless the client comes back for more, you don't often get to keep working on it. The Cooper Hewitt, actually, they have an amazing internal tech team and an experienced team, and they were great at putting analytics everywhere. And I think one of the biggest sort of success metrics for that was that 30% of visitors followed up afterwards, logged into the online account, and kind of explored their collection, which in the museum world is huge. If you get 3%, you're doing well. So that was massive. So it kind of depends on the client. They'll usually lead on that, and in cases like that, they just embed analytics everywhere, and they can start to assess it from that. I think they also had, for a short period, an internal sort of UX researcher who was doing ongoing research, so that when they come back to do more, they'll have that. Oh, there you go. Oh, awesome. Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. How it went?
So she did probably about 20 interviews in the space of 3 weeks.
Awesome.
20 people.
Cool. Great.
Thanks. I think the magic of tools is when they are used in unexpected ways, and what you're doing for museums seems to be quite guided or constrained. Have you had some new things or users doing things that you really weren't expecting or prepared for?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think there's definitely something about that. Like the best tools can kind of be hacked and reappropriated. That's super interesting. I mean, I guess that kind of selfie example in the wallpaper room is kind of one of them. The idea was you'd sit back here and you'd design the thing and you'd see it around you, but everyone creates it and then jumps into it, and it becomes a mask for them, and that kind of selfie thing happened. There's also the team on that project we did for the New York Hall of Science. They have this amazing team of educators, kind of the most inspiring, energetic teachers you could imagine. And out of the series of like apps, they were like hacking that to all extents. So they had all of these. They were doing all of these like crazy uses. So one of the apps, you explore volume. So you try and like take a photo of something and then try and like build it in 3D to estimate what its volume is. And another app is about distance and perspective. So you kind of set up those photographs where, you know, I'm here and you're standing on my hand, and then you look at the distance and why things are smaller. And so they started kind of hacking all of the apps together. So they built the Empire State Building, and then they were actually out here on like 6th Avenue or 7th Avenue using the other app to take photos of like comparing the height of the original building with the small one. And so yeah, you definitely see a lot of creative uses. But yeah, I don't know. I think definitely those. The more you see those opportunities, I think the more successful maybe the tool is.
All right, let's get a round of applause for John.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Matt.
All right, so that's the show for today. Hope you all had a very good time. We'll be back again next month, second Wednesday of the month. I think next month the topic is how to lie with charts. So thank you very much. Hope to see you again soon.